Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world. I I want you to think about your own life for just a second.
hmm
Have you ever felt like reality itself is it's fracturing? Or maybe you've watched someone, like a family member or a colleague, just slip down this internet rabbit hole.
Right.
And when they finally emerge, they're entirely unrecognizable.
It happens so often now.
It really does. And if you are nodding your head right now,
Yeah.
listening to this, you are definitely not alone.
hmm
But the thing is, you aren't just witnessing a series of bad individual choices. You are experiencing the outputs of a highly designed system.
That is honestly the perfect place to start. Today's deep dive is centered around a really fascinating book by Naomi Klein called Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World.
Yeah.
But just to be clear right up front, we are not doing a standard book review today. We aren't here to critique her writing style or anything like that.
Right.
Instead, we're using her text as an entry point. We're going to perform a massive systems-level institutional analysis. We want to examine the hidden machinery that dictates what we believe to be true.
And how our very identities get pulled into that machinery. But before we jump in, just to set some ground rules for you listening,
Good idea.
the source material we're looking at today gets into some pretty heavily charged political territory.
Very charged.
Yeah. It touches on everything from the far left to the far right, global health policies, conspiracy theories. Our job today is not to endorse the author's political viewpoints.
Exactly.
We aren't here to tell you who the good guys or the bad guys are.
Yeah.
We are here strictly to unpack the system that the book describes. We're impartially reporting on the framework, so we can actually look at the architecture of the modern internet.
Right. And the core system we're examining today is what the author refers to as the mirror world.
The mirror world.
Yeah. Now, it's really tempting to think of that as just a poetic metaphor for political divisions.
Sure. Like the left and the right, just mirroring each other.
Exactly, but we need to look at it as a literal, modern, institutional media environment. It's a socio-technical ecosystem.
Okay. Socio-technical ecosystem. Let's break that down for people.
It's basically just a fancy way of saying it's an environment where the technology we use and our human social behaviors are completely tangled up together.
Got it.
It's a space where identity branding, algorithmic amplification, and this highly lucrative market of conspiracy entrepreneurship all interact.
And according to the book, they interact in a way that distorts our shared reality,
Yeah.
right?
And completely reorganizes political coalitions in the process.
Which brings us to the really wild, inciting incident of this book. So the author, Naomi Klein, is a very well-known critic of corporate power.
Right.
She's generally positioned on the political left. But for over a decade, she has been chronically, just relentlessly confused online with another writer named Naomi Wolf.
Right. And the book frames Naomi Wolf's public trajectory as moving in a very different direction. Wolf is a former prominent feminist author who, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, underwent a massive public shift.
A huge shift.
Yeah. Klein's book details how Wolf began aligning with figures on the political right, became a prominent voice in anti-vaccine movements, and started sharing what the mainstream would classify as pretty extreme conspiracy theories.
So you have these two women, both writers, both Naomi, both writing about big societal issues, but from completely opposite ends of the spectrum, according to the source material, and people constantly mix them up.
Constantly.
The book describes how strangers would yell at Klein on the street for things Wolf said, or they'd thank her for things she never did.
It's just so strange.
At first glance, it sounds like a quirky, almost sitcom-level anecdote.
Very like a mail mix-up.
Exactly. But the book uses this to crack open something much bigger. How does this personal annoyance actually reveal a systemic vulnerability?
Well, it reveals everything about how our digital architecture functions. We have to elevate this from a funny case of mistaken identity to a really serious look at personal branding risk.
Okay.
In our modern digital landscape, your name and your identity, they're no longer just signifiers of who you are as a human being. They are market objects.
They're data.
They are data points to be processed.
The book actually gives a really jarring example of this involving a tweet, doesn't it? I remember reading that part and just being blown away.
It does, and it perfectly illustrates the mechanics at play. So at one point, Naomi Wolf made a highly controversial statement online. She equated the requirement to get a COVID vaccine with Jewish people being forced to wear yellow stars in Nazi Germany.
Wow.
Obviously, a highly offensive and explosive comparison. Naturally, someone on Twitter, now X, replied to express their absolute disgust.
Right as you would expect.
They wrote this scathing tweet accusing the author of losing her mind, but they directed their anger at Naomi Klein.
The author of our source text.
Yes.
So Klein gets hit with this massive wave of vitriol for a Holocaust analogy she didn't even make.
Exactly. But here is the critical pivot in the story. Klein replies to the user, essentially saying, "You have the wrong Naomi."
And the user apologizes, right?
Yes, the user immediately apologizes, deletes the tweet, and explains what happened. And this is the crazy part. The user hadn't actually typed out Naomi Klein's full name. They had started typing Naomi, and Twitter's autocomplete had helpfully filled in the rest.
It autofilled the wrong Naomi.
It autofilled the wrong Naomi.
That detail is just, it's wild to me. Because it wasn't even human error in the traditional sense. It was an algorithmic prompt.
Exactly.
The machine made the mistake and the human just hit send.
Right. And let's think about the underlying plumbing of that moment. Machine learning imitates patterns. It learns from how people behave at scale.
Okay.
Because these two Naomis were frequently mixed up by users, even by people making jokes about how often they get mixed up. The platform's algorithm learned to associate them mathematically.
It just saw the data points clustering together.
Exactly. It decided they were statistically adjacent.
Yeah.
So misrecognition in the digital age is no longer just human clumsiness. It is a designed algorithmic output.
Wow. If you're listening to this, just think about your own phone. Think about how often it finishes your sentences or suggests the next word. We think of autocomplete as this frictionless user experience feature.
It saves us a fraction of a second.
Right. But what Klein is arguing is that this UX feature actually becomes a vector for identity collapse.
Precisely. The platform's affordances, meaning the tools it gives us to interact, actually prompt and deepen the confusion. And here is the real trap.
What's the trap?
Anything Naomi Klein did to correct the record online, any tweet saying, "I am not her," would contain both of their names.
Oh, right.
And that would only further train the algorithm to link them together in its database. This turns individual identity into a structural vulnerability.
You literally can't win.
You are no longer in control of how you are presented or categorized in the public square. The machine is doing it for you, based on mass behavioral data, entirely to save a user a microsecond of typing.
That really forces you to step back and ask, how on earth did we get here? How did our deeply personal identities become so enmeshed with corporate machines?
Well, the book traces this system back to the imperative of what it calls brand you.
Brand you. And I know the author points to a specific piece of media from the 1990s to anchor this shift.
Yes, it references a very famous 1997 article in Fast Company magazine by a management consultant named Tom Peters. The article is called "The Brand Called You."
Okay, so put yourself back in 1997.
It's hard to imagine now.
It is. The idea that an average person, a middle manager, a freelance writer, a college student should treat themselves as a corporate brand was considered absurd back then.
Completely. Brands were for Nike or Coca-Cola or Michael Jordan. The idea of personal branding felt dystopic to the average person.
Right. In the 90s, if you were a teenager, you moved through the world leaving virtually no data trail. Your mistakes, your bad haircuts, your awkward conversations, they just vanished into the ether. They were ephemeral.
But then the infrastructure changed. We got the smartphone, followed by Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. What was once a bizarre management consulting theory in 1997 became a mandatory condition of modern life.
It's required now.
It is. Today, almost everyone is compelled to fashion a partitioned, stylized identity online. We all have to act as our own PR departments, managing our brand across multiple platforms just to participate in society or the economy.
And Klein argues that this transition wasn't an accident, right? It wasn't just organic cultural evolution.
According to the source, no. It is the result of deliberate systemic design. The book draws a really powerful parallel to the historical concept of enclosure.
Enclosure, let's dig into that.
If we look back at the Middle Ages, particularly in England, there were common lands. These were open spaces shared by the community for grazing sheep, foraging, just existing. But over time, wealthy landowners physically fenced off or enclosed these common lands. They turned a shared community resource into a private commodity to maximize profit.
So the book is essentially arguing that we are going through a digital enclosure right now.
Exactly. Our relationships, our casual conversations, our political debates, our family photos, these are the modern commons. They are the spaces where human life actually happens.
Right.
But corporate tech platforms have built fences around them. They offer us the space for free, but the enclosure means they harvest every single interaction as data. The platforms aren't designed to foster human connection. They're designed to maximize the yield of behavioral data.
To put it bluntly, we are the crop. Our interactions are the yield.
Exactly.
And to survive in this enclosed digital space, the book suggests the system demands a very specific set of behaviors. It calls it a triad of doppelganging. Can you break that triad down? Because I think this is where you, the listener, will start recognizing your own daily habits.
Absolutely. The first step of this triad is that you must partition the self.
Partition the self.
Yes. You have to separate the messy, contradictory, three-dimensional human being from the sleek online avatar. You decide what parts of you fit the brand and what parts stay hidden.
Okay.
The second step is that you must perform that perfected brand endlessly. You have to feed the algorithm with content that reinforces this artificial persona to maintain engagement.
You can never stop posting.
Right. And the third step, which is where the psychology gets really dark, is that you must project the unwanted traits onto others.
Oh, wow.
The abject, problematic, or messy parts of humanity that you've partitioned away from yourself. You look for those exact traits in other people online and attack them for it.
You build a digital double, and then you have to constantly feed it and defend it by attacking others.
Exactly.
Which brings us to this incredibly eerie concept from the text, the digital golem.
The golem.
Yeah. Now, when we say avatar or digital double, most people probably picture their Instagram profile. You know, the photos they choose to upload, the clever captions they write. But the digital golem is something entirely different, isn't it?
It is much deeper than the conscious persona you curate. In folklore, a golem is an animated anthropomorphic being created entirely from inanimate matter, usually mud or clay.
Right.
The digital golem is the invisible, machine-made double constructed entirely from your data points. You don't consciously build it. The platforms build it out of your digital exhaust.
So it's made of the location tracking on your phone, the things you ask your smart speaker, the articles you hover over for 2 seconds but don't actually click.
Yes. Your purchase history. Tech companies use this massive reservoir of invisible data to build a highly accurate, predictive model of you.
That's unsettling.
It is. This golem knows your anxieties, your impulses, what makes you angry, and what you're likely to buy at 2 a.m. And the source material points out something brilliant about how this extraction is hidden from us. It uses the concept of aesthetic masking.
Aesthetic masking. Let's translate that. The book uses the example of that magic avatar craze from a little while ago, specifically with apps like Lenta.
Yeah.
I remember everyone on my timeline was suddenly posting these incredible AI-generated portraits of themselves as cyberpunk hackers or fairy tale royalty.
That is the perfect example of aesthetic masking. Millions of people eagerly downloaded that app and uploaded dozens of highly detailed photos of their faces.
Right.
They willingly handed over incredibly valuable biometric data, the exact geometry of their faces to a tech company. Why? Because the company wrapped that data extraction in a pretty gamified aesthetic.
They gave people back a hyper-perfected artificial simulation of themselves.
Exactly. We fall in love with our projections and we completely ignore the machinery harvesting our data.
This raises a really unsettling question for the listener. What happens when your projection, your digital golem, your brand, starts feeling more important than your actual life?
That is the danger.
The source material introduces a highly revealing anecdote about Steve Bannon that I think gets right to the heart of this. Now, Bannon is widely known today as a major political strategist and a massive figure in right-wing media. But long before he was in the White House, back in the 2000s, he worked at a company in Hong Kong that was involved in multiplayer gaming. They were basically farming gold in World of Warcraft.
Yes, and while Bannon was immersed in that gaming culture, the book notes that he realized something profound about the human psychology of the players. He observed that for these gamers, their powerful digital avatars felt more real and more vital to them than their physical lives.
How so?
Well, he used a hypothetical example to explain it. He described a guy named Dave in accounting.
Dave in accounting, okay.
Dave lives a dreary life, has a boring job, maybe feels completely disempowered in the real world. But when Dave goes home and logs onto the internet, he becomes Ajax, a heavily armed, incredibly powerful warrior who commands respect and has a vital mission.
Right.
Bannon looked at that dynamic and asked a fundamental question. Who is more real, Dave or Ajax?
And the terrifying part is, Bannon's conclusion was that Ajax is more real. The book quotes him essentially saying that Dave in accounting should just back down and let Ajax take over his life.
And if we applied a systems-level analysis to that anecdote, the takeaway is massive. The digital architecture we live in today is designed so that the projection overtakes the person. It gamifies reality.
It gamifies reality.
Yes. And when the digital Ajax decides to act in the physical world, the boundaries of reality collapse.
The book actually maps this exact phenomenon onto real-world political violence, specifically pointing to the January 6th Capitol riot. Klein frames it through this lens of gamification.
She does. The author argues that when you look at the footage of January 6th, you see people showing up in face paint, wearing pelts, dressed in tactical military gear. According to the book's framing, they were essentially cosplaying as their digital avatars in the real world.
They were bringing Ajax into the physical world.
Exactly. They were acting out a live-action role-playing game based on the narratives they consumed in their digital silos. And the author notes how genuinely shocked many of them seemed when real-world physical consequences like being shot or being arrested actually occurred.
Because in a game, you just respawn.
Right. The fantasy of the digital world had merged so completely with their minds that the incentive structures of the internet completely overpowered their physical reality.
Speaking of those incentive structures, the emotional toll of maintaining these digital avatars is absolutely grueling. I want to pivot to the influencer economy for a moment.
A perfect example.
If you spend any time on YouTube or TikTok, you've inevitably seen what I call the breakdown video. You have these young, wildly successful internet personalities, and suddenly they post a video sitting on their bedroom floor, no makeup, crying into the camera.
We've all seen them.
They talk about the unbearable pressure of having to pump out content every single day, terrified that if they take a break, the algorithm will bury them and their audience will move on to a copycat. My initial reaction to those videos is always empathy.
Of course.
But the book suggests that even that pain is part of the machinery.
It is the ultimate trap of the incentive architecture. Let's break down what the system actually rewards. It rewards engagement, status capture, and audience monetization above all else. To survive in the attention economy, the book argues that people must thingify themselves.
Thingify themselves, turn into object.
Yes. You have to turn your personality, your quirks, and your life into a brand, into an object to be consumed. But once you are a thing, your audience treats you like a thing. They attack you, they look for flaws, they tear you down.
Because psychologically, objects don't bleed.
Exactly. So the creator is pushed to the absolute brink by the audience and the algorithm. They finally crack under the pressure, and what do?
They post the breakdown video.
They have to perform their raw trauma. They post the breakdown video to humanize themselves again and regain sympathy. But tragically, as the author points out, that performative trauma just feeds the algorithmic machine even more blood.
Because it gets engagement.
Massive engagement. A breakdown video generates huge numbers. People click, comment, share. The algorithm doesn't care if you're happy or suicidal. It only cares about time on page. So the pain itself becomes just another monetizable content stream. It's a vicious, inescapable feedback loop dictated entirely by the system's design.
Okay, so that's what happens when the system is working for you. You become a successful, highly engaged, completely miserable influencer. But what happens when the brand finally breaks entirely?
That's where things shift.
What happens when someone falters, fails, or is deplatformed for breaking the rules? Because when someone gets kicked off a platform, they don't just vanish into thin air.
No, they don't disappear. And this is the moment we officially enter the mechanics of the mirror world. When individuals, especially those with large followings, are kicked off mainstream platforms for violating terms of service, spreading misinformation, or engaging in hate speech, they migrate.
Right.
The source text maps out a completely parallel copycat infrastructure that has been built specifically to catch them.
It's a literal mirror image of the mainstream internet. If you get kicked off Twitter, you don't stop tweeting. You go to Getter or Truth Social.
Yeah.
If you are censored by YouTube, you set up a channel on Rumble. If GoFundMe refuses to process your donations because your cause violates their harassment policies, you just move your campaign over to GiveSendGo.
Exactly. And we have to analyze the systemic reward mechanism at play in this alternative ecosystem. The mirror world operates on an incentive structure of what we can call grievance conversion.
Grievance conversion, tell me more.
Think about it. When someone is exiled from the mainstream internet, they aren't treated as outcasts in the mirror world. They are greeted as martyrs. They suddenly regain the attention they lost, they gain new respect, and crucially, they regain their monetization.
But there's a catch, isn't there? The book emphasizes that they don't get that hero's welcome just for showing up.
That is the key systemic driver. They only get those rewards by leaning heavily into the exact behaviors that got them banned in the first place.
Oh, I see.
If you were banned from YouTube for spreading a mild conspiracy theory about vaccines, your new audience on Rumble demands more extreme vaccine content. They are paying you to be the person the mainstream rejected. So the system literally monetizes their exile and hardens their radicalization.
That is a terrifying feedback loop for society. Algorithmic reach leads to audience capture. The creator realizes what the audience wants and gets radicalized by their own followers.
Yes.
That leads to identity hardening, which leads to getting banned, which drops them right into an ecosystem that pays them a premium to be even more extreme.
And when you look at it structurally, the societal outcomes of this are entirely predictable. It results in this intense, intractable political polarization. Society essentially splits in two, with each side defining itself strictly in opposition to the other.
Yes, and this is where the doppelganger dynamics we discussed at the individual level, partitioning the self and projecting the bad onto others, scale up to a macro level.
Exactly.
It acts as a mechanism for political polarization.
Well,
The source describes this functioning like reverse marionettes.
that's a great image.
Imagine two puppets tied together. If one side of the political spectrum advocates for a specific policy, say, for example, wearing masks during a respiratory pandemic, the mirror world automatically, almost reflexively, advocates for the exact opposite. If one side kicks, the other hugs.
It's pure opposition.
Right. It ceases to be about rational policy debate. It becomes an identity-protective response. You aren't arguing about the efficacy of masks. You are signaling which reality you belong to.
And the source gives some really incredible examples of this mirror politics in action. Mainstream media talks endlessly about the big lie, the false claim that Donald Trump won the 2020 election. In the mirror world, the book notes that figures like Steve Bannon talk about the big steal, the claim that Joe Biden stole it.
A perfect mirror.
Mainstream politicians talk about how Trump fomented the January 6th insurrection. The mirror world talks about how mainstream politicians enabled rioters to burn down cities during the 2020 racial justice protests. There is literally a copycat story and a mirror agenda for everything.
And we must recognize the engineering behind this. These mirror narratives don't just spontaneously arise from grassroots sentiment. According to Klein's analysis, they are specifically engineered to repel any argument from the other side.
Narrative shields.
Yes, they act as narrative shields.
Yeah.
Think about trying to argue with someone deep in this ecosystem. If you try to introduce nuance or present a factual correction from a mainstream institution, the mirror world already has a prepackaged counter-narrative designed to dismiss you.
Right. They just say, you are part of the matrix, or you are suffering from groupthink.
Exactly. It completely freezes any chance of genuine democratic debate because you aren't actually arguing about a shared set of facts. You're arguing across a dimensional rift where the other side views you as an NPC, a non-player character in a simulation who is just regurgitating programmed lines.
Okay, here is where the book gets incredibly strange. And I think this is one of the most surprising systemic outcomes that Klein explores. We've talked about the political right. But how did soft-focus wellness influencers, people whose entire online presence is selling Nogamats, essential oils, and organic green smoothies, end up making common cause with fire-breathing, far-right political propagandists?
Right, that crossover is so weird.
This is what the text calls diagonalism.
Diagonalism.
Yeah.
That's a crucial structural concept to grasp if you want to understand the modern internet. Often people try to explain these weird alliances using the horseshoe theory, the old political science idea that if you go far enough to the left and far enough to the right, they eventually bend and meet at the extremes.
Right, but the source text argues that this isn't the far left meeting the far right. It describes it as the far out meeting the far right.
The far out, I love that framing.
It's an alliance built not on shared traditional political values, but on shared distrust markets.
Shared distrust markets. I want to linger on that phrase because it really unlocks the whole puzzle. How does a distrust market work in practice? How do a yoga instructor and a militia member end up on the same side of a protest?
Let's trace the connections as the book lays them out. On one side, you have New Age spiritualists, holistic health practitioners, and wellness influencers. Their entire brand is built on bodily purity.
Oh, godly purity.
The idea that the human body is a sacred temple, that it can heal itself naturally, and that it must not be polluted by artificial chemicals or pharmaceuticals. Then, institutional mandates arrived during the pandemic, lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine requirements.
And for the wellness community, that was a massive shock to the system.
A profound ideological rupture. They viewed these mandates as an assault on their bodily sovereignty. At the exact same time, right-wing populists were viewing these identical mandates as an assault on their individual liberties and an overreach of a tyrannical state. These two groups previously had very little to say to one another, but suddenly they merged over a shared hostility toward institutional mandates.
The text gives an amazing concrete example of this with something called the disinformation dozen.
Yes.
When researchers tried to track down the sources of roughly 65% of the junk claims and misinformation circulating online about COVID and vaccines, you'd think it would be mostly right-wing political pundits. But it wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
The book notes it was a chiropractor, 3 different osteopaths, people selling essential oils to cure cancer, and a holistic psychiatrist who posts videos of herself pole dancing while telling people to fight off COVID without masks. It's a who's who of woo.
And Klein points out this wasn't just an American phenomenon. The source mentions a movement in Germany called Querdenken, which translates roughly to lateral or outside-the-box thinking. In these protests, you had wellness obsessives, people who normally just want to drink pure water, hike in the Alps, and eat organic food, marching alongside people the author identifies as members of neo-fascist parties. They were united in protesting what they called hygiene dictatorships.
And just like with influencers earlier, we have to look at the money. The monetization layer of this diagonal alliance is huge.
It is highly profitable. This diagonal meridian is bankrolled by the sale of dietary supplements, cryptocurrency schemes, survival gear, and premium subscription models. The wellness influencers leading this charge realized something very quickly.
What's that?
Leaning into conspiratorial politics massively boosted their algorithm engagement, which in turn massively boosted their sales.
So it proves that in this digital architecture, clout is a completely values-free currency.
Exactly. Clout doesn't care about ideological purity. Clout doesn't care if you are selling a hard-right political ideology or a vaginal moisturizer, both of which, the text dryly notes, are sold by prominent figures in this space. Clout simply bridges these supposedly opposite ideologies by rewarding whoever can generate the most outrage and distrust in the institutions.
But I want to pause here and ask a critical question on behalf of you, the listener. If we step back for a second, why do these fantastical narratives gain so much traction? Why are millions of rational, everyday people willing to believe that vaccines contain microchips, or that a cabal of global elites is trying to enslave them via QR codes?
It's a great question.
It can't just be that everyone has suddenly lost their minds, or that the algorithms are literally performing mind control.
Yeah.
There has to be a foundation, right?
That is the essential analytical question of the book. And to answer it, Klein forces us to shift our focus to institutional legitimacy gaps. The mirror world does not pull its energy from nowhere. It thrives because conventional institutions actually do fail people, repeatedly and profoundly.
The failures are real.
The distrust that fuels this entire ecosystem is, at its root, rational, even if the eventual conclusions people draw are fantastical.
The source material provides some truly devastating examples of these real systemic failures to ground this point.
It does. It points to the horrific maternal mortality rates for Black women in the Western medical system, where their pain is frequently ignored or discounted by doctors. How do you trust a medical establishment that routinely fails you?
You don't.
It points to the complete opacity of big tech companies who harvest our personal data with zero democratic accountability. It highlights global pharmaceutical companies who protected their vaccine patents using intellectual property laws, despite those vaccines being developed with billions in public tax money.
Right, effectively keeping life-saving medicine out of the global south to protect corporate profit.
Exactly. And it notes the billionaires whose wealth skyrocketed exponentially while the rest of the world suffered through lockdowns, job losses, and economic crises.
So the system is actually broken. When people experience or witness these profound systemic failures, it generates deep, entirely justified anger and distrust. But here is the critical feedback loop the book identifies. Instead of that distrust generating a coherent systemic critique of predatory capitalism, or a movement for universal health care, or a push for massive data privacy laws, the mirror world intercepts it.
Yes, the mirror world hijacks that valid anger. It intercepts the energy of systemic critique and substitutes it with highly personalized villain stories.
Let me make sure I'm translating this right. Instead of saying the intellectual property regime of global pharmaceutical companies prioritizes profit over human life, which is a complex structural critique,
Right.
the mirror world says Bill Gates is personally trying to depopulate the Earth with a microchip.
Precisely. It takes complex, deeply entrenched systemic issues, things that would require massive, sustained political organizing to fix, and reduces them to a comic book narrative of good versus evil. The villains are highly personalized: Bill Gates, Anthony Fauci, the World Economic Forum, George Soros.
And by personalizing the systemic failures, the mirror world offers a much easier narrative to digest.
It's intellectually lazy, but deeply satisfying. You don't have to read up on international trade law or the history of patent legislation. You just have to hate the designated bad guy.
And let's look at how this works with the pipelining of fear, specifically around technology. The text brings up the intense fear that was rampant in the mirror world about vaccine passports eventually transforming into a Chinese Communist Party-style social credit score.
Yes.
The book mentions how Naomi Wolf was going on Steve Bannon's show and terrifying the audience, claiming these digital apps would track everything they do and have the power to literally turn off your life.
And how did the mainstream react to that fear? I remember the reaction well. It was mostly mockery.
Right. And if we analyze how this works structurally, the mirror world's manipulation is brilliant. It takes legitimate, latent fears about Silicon Valley surveillance fears, about our phones tracking our locations, smart speakers listening to our conversations in our living rooms, facial recognition software scraping our photos without consent.
These are real, documented invasions of privacy.
But mainstream liberals, according to clients, often dismiss these fears when they are voiced by people on the right.
Yes. The Tats mentions exactly that dynamic, the smug liberal reaction of, oh, you're worried about microchips in a vaccine. You literally carry a tracking device in your pocket every day.
And Klein argues that smugness is a massive strategic error. By dismissing these valid underlying fears about mass surveillance, just because they are wrapped in a messy conspiracy theory, the mainstream leaves a vacuum.
And the mirror world rushes in to fill that vacuum. It validates the fear. It says, you are right to be terrified. They are tracking you. They do want to turn off your life.
So by validating those latent tech fears, the mirror world completely captures the audience.
Yes, it radicalizes them by tying that valid fear to immediate, fantastical plots. And crucially, it hardens their identity against a mainstream that they now view as not only blind to the danger, but actively complicit in it.
That's incredibly dangerous.
This has a secondary, very dark outcome. It further disengages these people from any actual democratic process that could regulate big tech. They substitute political organizing with a desire to overthrow the system entirely, or they just retreat into survivalist prep.
Living in this environment where half the population thinks the other half is either a fascist or a brainwashed sheep requires immense cognitive dissonance.
It does.
The text introduces a great phrase to describe the vertigo of navigating a society partitioned into these warring camps. It's a crisis in perception.
Crisis in perception.
Think about it. We look at people deep in these rabbit holes and see folks brainwashed by algorithms and exploited by grifters. They look at us and see people trapped in the matrix, suffering from mass formation psychosis, blindly trusting corrupt institutions. It's terrifying. But I have to ask, if this system is so absurd, if it's so detached from our shared reality, why does it persist? Why do people stay in the mirror world?
According to the book, it persists despite its absurdity because it offers profound psychological comfort.
Comfort. That sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah.
How is believing there's a satanic cabal running the world comfortable?
Psychologically speaking, it serves a massive defensive purpose. The source material introduces a concept from the novelist Daisy Hildyard called the second body, or the Shadowlands.
Okay.
Hildyard argues that every single person living a conscious, comfortable life in a wealthy Western nation is invisibly tethered to an underworld of exploitation.
Unpack that. What does that tether look like?
When we eat our cheap food, when we drive our cars, when we upgrade to the newest smartphone, those actions are propped up by a shadow, self-traversing parallel worlds of suffering. It's the sweatshop laborers in China assembling the electronics. It's the children in cobalt mines in the Congo digging up materials for our batteries.
The people we don't see.
Exactly. It's migrants drowning in the Mediterranean seeking the safety we take for granted. It's entire ecosystems being destroyed for oil extraction. Klein frames this as the mundane, structural barbarism of our modern economic system.
It's the horrific underbelly of modern convenience. We all implicitly know about it, but we studiously ignore it so we can just get through the day without being paralyzed by guilt.
Exactly. And the author posits that the conspiratorial mindset of the mirror world acts as a defense mechanism against our complicity in those shadowlands. It is psychologically much easier to invent a fantasy of
A
justice.
fantasy of justice.
It is easier to believe in a secret, cartoonishly evil cabal of pedophiles or globalists who are responsible for all the world's misery. Why? Because it is infinitely harder to face the reality that the misery is caused by the very economic system that provides our daily comforts.
Oh, wow. If the evil is a secret cabal, then the solution is simple. Arrest the cabal. It's a narrative that requires no personal sacrifice from the believer.
Exactly. The mirror world's chaotic plots serve as an elaborate cover story to avoid looking inward. It's an avoidance tactic. If we focus all our energy on fighting the Illuminati, we don't have to reckon with the massive, difficult structural changes that would actually be required to dismantle the Shadowlands and build a truly equitable society.
So bringing this all together, we've covered digital enclosures, algorithmic doppelgangers, diagonalism, and shadowlands. I want to ask you the central analytical question of this entire deep dive. What is the crisis in perception here?
To answer that analytically, we have to break down the four critical layers of systemic blindness that this text reveals. First, what is being misperceived? We are consistently misperceiving systemic crises as personalized villain stories. We are mistaking vast, complex structural failures like the collapse of public health care, the hoarding of wealth, or the enclosure of the digital commons for petty identity dramas and partisan bickering.
We're looking at the wrong thing.
Exactly. Second, what structural layer is obscured? By hyper-focusing on the outrageous statements of individuals like getting endlessly angry at what a specific influencer or politician posted today, we obscure the underlying incentive architecture. We fail to see the algorithmic attention markets, the branding imperatives, and the highly lucrative distrust markets that are actively paying those individuals to produce that toxic behavior. Third, why surface interpretation fails. When we look at the mirror world, we tend to treat their narrative conflicts as genuine truth contests. We try to fact-check them. We bring scientific papers to an algorithmic gunfight. This fails because we are arguing with the output of a machine without examining the machinery producing it. We are trying to debate an avatar.
And the fourth layer.
How systems-level analysis changes visibility. When we put on a systems-level lens, the chaos suddenly makes sense. It reveals the mirror world not as a spontaneous gathering of irrational or crazy people, but as an entirely predictable output of design and incentives operating exactly as intended. The system is working perfectly, it's just designed to produce polarization, distrust, and profit, rather than human connection and truth.
That is a remarkably clarifying way to look at it. It takes the absolute madness of the internet and grounds it in cold, hard structural reality. It makes you realize that arguing with the symptoms will never cure the disease. I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. If our very identities, our political movements, and our valid desires for a better world are continually being mirrored, co-opted, and commodified by these platforms, how do we actually build solidarity? Consider what it would take to interact with your community without the mediation of algorithms that actively profit from keeping you separated and angry. How do we dismantle the digital golem, stop performing our partitioned brands, and step back into a shared, ungamified reality? Because until we do, we will remain trapped in the Hall of Mirrors.
That's the real challenge ahead of us.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer link in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.